Thanks for joining us today. My name's Robert Yen. I'm the maths publisher at Nelson Cengage, and today I've got with me Anna Wetherill and Sam Hodgson, two members of the author team behind the Nelson Maths, the new Nelson Maths Senior Maths series. So I have left my email address down there at the bottom in case you have any further questions, but we'll try to answer some questions today. If you have any questions, just type them up in the Q&A box and we'll try to get back to you. I've also left my our website, cengage.com.au, Nelson Secondary, where you can find some more information about Nelson Math, years 11 and 12. So before we officially start, let's do an acknowledgement of country. So in the spirit of reconciliation, Cengage Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. A bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and the recording will be sent out next week to all who registered. If you have any questions for Anna and Sam, then please put them in the Q&A. We will try to answer your questions as soon as possible during the webinar, but if we don't get it to you, we will try to email you afterwards. And after the webinar, if you have further questions, you can, I guess you can email me, but it also says here, there is an email in the chat where you can contact Nelson Cengage. Okay, so today we're looking at maths methods and exam tips and advice, but just a bit about ourselves. So we've got Anna and Sam here, and they're on the author team for two of these three books. So we've got general maths. We're publishing for general maths, maths methods, and essential maths. So Anna's on both the general and maths methods team, and Sam's on the maths methods team. And I'll put up this slide. I mean, you can read it in more detail later, but it's a bit of background about everybody, all our authors. So on the maths methods author team, we've got Anna, Sam, and Lachlan, and they all have teaching experience. Some of the authors also have head teacher experience. So with general maths, we've got Lani, Tracy, Anna again, and then we've also got Stephen Swift as the series editor. And you'll notice that some of the authors are also have experience marking the new exams. Last year we did some webinars as well on what's new with each of the syllabuses, and you can watch them on YouTube. We've recorded them and put them on our Nelson Secondary YouTube channel for essential maths, general maths, and maths methods. And finally, we are also running another webinar next Thursday, this time next week, on general maths, exam analysis and tips. Last week we did one on essential maths, and that's already been recorded and it's available on YouTube. So just to let you know about that. And then also we have published for Nelson Maths for 7 to 10 as well recently for the Australian curriculum. So now we have maths titles all across 7 to 12. So just to let you know, and you can find out more about it on our website. So I might hand over to Anna now and Sam to talk to you about the new Nelson Maths series.
Sure. I'm happy to take the lead to start with, Sam, if you like. But as per usual, Sam and I are a bit of a dancing duo, so you'll see a bit of flipping and shuffling around as we want to make sure you get the best out of this session tonight. Basically, in a nutshell, we had a really awesome opportunity as authors to relook at how Nelson Cengage has entered into this market with our textbooks. So you've got a whole new author team. We've all been teachers here in Queensland. We've got an array of people that have written exams, people that have marked exams, people that have done review processes. So all of that unique talent has come together to put together a book, I think, that is pretty special, but again, I am very biased around that. One of the key design principles that we used was acknowledging that preparation in year 12 really needs to be focused on how you get your students ready to sit that external exam at the end of the year. And as such, that has helped define how we put things together to make that evident not only to students, but to provide you as a teacher with as much assistance in ensuring that your students cover all that they need to cover. We held ourselves massively accountable to the syllabus, so we were forever checking the dot points in the syllabus and then mapping that to our exercises and our chapters to highlight that there was that definite connection between what was expected and what we were providing you with. So one of the things that you will find is that, you know, whilst we all have a lot of passion about maths, these books are really a very streamlined interpretation of the maths content. So where in some of our competitors' books you will see lots of exploration into areas that aren't necessarily covered in the syllabus, you will not find that in our books. And all of these features that we're talking about today apply effectively across the general maths and the maths method textbooks, with some slight nuances, obviously, for the different way in which the courses are constructed. So if we go on the next slide. Yep. So one of the things that I think is really unique to our series is that we took every available question from the QCEE and we have basically mapped that into all of our different chapters, into all of the added resources that are there. We've got a variety of questions that address the different criteria that our students will be exposed to both in internal and external exams. So our simple familiar, complex familiar, and complex unfamiliar. And we've also got problems that will extend our students beyond simply that surface understanding, but show them how they can be critical, creative, modelling and problem solving students. And at the end of each of our chapters, there is an exam question analysis. You'll also see, as we show you, tips and tricks, which we call them exam hacks, and they are advice that's come from people that have taught the content, people that have marked, people that have written exams. Again, just to optimize the assistance that we can give all of our students and you if you use the textbook. So we've got here an illustration of one of our exercises. So this is actually from a chapter that Sam was the author of. And what I'd like to highlight here is that each of our exercises in the textbook have three distinct sections to them. Recap, where we're looking at the content that was covered in the previous section of the textbook, or of that chapter. Then you've got a mastery section, which is delving into the content that was covered within that small section of the textbook. But then it brings us to the third piece, which is why we're here today, which is around exam tips and tricks. And one of the things that we've got here, as I said, was we've mapped all of our questions into our exercises. So you can see question 20 there. That is actually one of the 2020 exam paper. It was on the tech-free exam, and there's a lovely little blue bit there, which is actually the number of students that got that particular multiple choice question right. So this slide here zooms in on that for you. So you can see here, sorry, it was 2023. I need new glasses, sorry. 2023, and it was on paper 1, question 7. So we've gone down to that level of detail, the year, the paper, and the actual question, in case you're looking for where to get additional information, say from your marking guides and things like that. So in that particular question, you know that the correct answer that you had, that blue little sort of ovally kind of shape, that's how many students got that right. Then you can also see for questions 24, 26 and 27, in that exam practice, where there are questions that we have created ourselves, we've then labelled those as being either complex familiar or complex unfamiliar. Again, just as another little way to signpost the level of complexity that would be expected for a student that was entering into that work or into that particular question. So that's an overview of just showing you within the actual exercises itself how we've mapped it. So here again, this is another example of an exercise where we've got lots of questions in there that have got the labels to indicate that they are examined questions that have happened over the last few years. Notice with question 12 that it doesn't actually have a label. That particular question there is a question that was created again by us as an author team, and we've been very explicit in trying to match the way in which the QCEE and other assessment authorities across Australia construct problems. Again, to create that familiarity with students around how questions are composed and how they are expected to then enter into something either quite quickly or to get rid of distractors and things like that that might be in the problem. Now, again, here, this is showcasing how we label the questions. And the other thing that we thought was really important was actually labeling our questions as tech-free. This occurs even when it's not a QCEE tech-free exam question. So be aware that you will see that throughout our exercises. Now,
did you notice
slide.
the year?
Oh, sorry.
I'll look at the year.
Oh yes, sorry. This one of the really important things I forgot to mention. So the 2024 exam papers, as you guys would know, has only come out really quite recently. So we did quite a bit of beavering away at that exam paper and making sure that we then actually put those questions in. So we have, as I said, we've taken everything from the sample papers that were created many, many moons ago, all the way to that 2024 exam paper and put those in there. So you are getting the complete suite of QCEE questions in there if they were written with that external examination in mind. All right, now what I'm going to delve into really quickly is some tips and tricks around our multiple choice questions. So as I'm sure you're all aware, we've got 10 questions on paper 1, which are multiple choice, and 10 questions in paper 2. And what I think, you know, Sam and I were discussing this the other day, and it's quite common that we would tend to anticipate that students should be able to enter into these questions and complete them in around 90 seconds. So, you know, a little bit of advice that we give students would be that this section should ultimately take them about 15 minutes if they were doing it in the exam paper. That's not to say that they can't have more questions, but it's a good indicative piece of advice to give your students. Now, one of the things that I did recently was look at that 2024 exam paper, and I was curious to see what were our top questions. And these were the 2 top questions that appeared in the tech-free paper this year, or sorry, in 2024. You know, question 1 to me isn't particularly that surprising, that it's a nice straightforward integration question. And then we've got a nice derivative question. So we had 93% of our students got that right. So in the actual chapters, you would see that those percentages that are in green are those blue numbers that we saw before. So what I find interesting about this is where the distribution of incorrect responses is actually positioned. Now, if we go on, the worst questions on that exam were these 2. And now originally I was looking at questions that were below 50% of the cohort, and these actually were the only 2 that existed on paper 1. So we had that log question coming in at 35%, and here we had 53% coming in with option C there. To me, again, interesting little sort of bit of information around what is it that was causing students to have such an issue with those types of questions. But stepping back from that, the next thing that I did was to actually look at, well, across all of the years of papers that we've got, what were the distribution of those questions that were really good, and then the ones that were less so good. So you can see going across the questions that were below 50%, there aren't a lot of them except for in 2022, which that was an interesting paper, coming out with 4 questions there that were under that 50%. Having my experience formerly at NESA, when you see results like that on an exam paper, you have to ask yourself some questions around how and why you wrote those questions the way that you did, and you obviously learn from that the next year, and we can see that we were back to only 1 question appearing below that sort of 50% mark. In the best categories there, it's quite evident that our students are strong, particularly in the last 2 years in calculus. But I think it's also really cool to see that statistics plays a certainly in the earlier years when it was more unfamiliar to us as a cohort of teachers, that we obviously did a really good job at addressing that because of those 2 questions coming in above the 80% mark. The red bits there, this is something that these are questions that actually won't appear in our grade 12 book, and they won't appear because that content is no longer located within unit 3 and unit 4. So those particular questions, they now sit back in unit 2. So there are some questions that you won't find, and they have been deliberately not put in because they're no longer relevant. That's not to say that the skill that was assessed in those multiple choice questions couldn't form the basis or an entry point into another question within those areas, but that from a multiple choice perspective, assessing those skills would not be something that you would see the QCEE doing. Now, going on to the tech paper, our tech active, these were our top 3 questions there. So we've got a probability, another 2 calculus type questions. We're 94, 83 and 81. And these results were really quite strong. There doesn't appear to be any rhyme or reason to where students are laying their errors. That it's a bit sort of splattergun. No particular trend there in that data. We only had 1 question, I think it was, that was the worst, which was question 8. And I think this is an interesting one because it obviously demonstrates that students weren't or didn't take into account the actual position of the graph and above and below, and got caught by a couple of, well, particularly got caught by number A, which was not recognising that difference between the signs. So that's your multiple choice, just a bit of a brief analysis. Going into the actual mapping of the question, again, we're seeing strength where we would expect to see strength in those questions. But again, there are 4 questions that would no longer or should no longer appear in exam papers into the future. And for those ones, we've tried to incorporate or make sure we've incorporated those skills into problems that we've written for students to engage with. Now, a couple of little tips and tricks around this. One of the things that I would do with my students is not only ask them to complete the multiple choice questions that we have in the textbook, but I would actually challenge them to justify what was wrong with the other questions or the other answers, sorry, that were there. And one of the key types of distractors or answers, so our other options that are available, these are the 5 sort of most obvious types of answers that you will see exam writers write. There are those conceptual slip-ups, so yes, miscalculating something, like that question that we just saw a moment ago where you're finding the area between 2 points and making sure that there's an above and a below. So if students don't adjust for that appropriately, they would get that. Misreading problems. This is obviously a very common thing that students do get confused by. That actually reminds me, one of the other things we've done in writing this book is all of the representations of formulas that you will see are exactly the same as they would appear on our formula sheet. So we have adhered exactly to the way that the QCEE wants us to represent fundamentally those formulas. That's the way that we've done that. The other 3 areas for misunderstanding: conceptual understanding, overgeneralizing patterns, and misremembering things. Not the horrible ones. Look, some of them, I think they've improved some of the formulas, and I will probably just leave it like that.
Agreed.
Sorry about that.
Agreed.
All right, and so moving on, so some examples of this in practice. So this was a question on the 2022 paper. on paper 1, tech free. And it was where the students had to find the area of that little shaded section. And so you can see here the 4 different answers, the types of distractor that it applied. So really 2 of the 4, they're really expected students to understand that difference between radians and degrees. They needed to understand how to actually find an area, and the correct answer here was B. And only 30% of our students actually were able to do that. So, you know, what that indicates to me particularly, that given that 56% didn't understand the concept of a radian, that would be something that I would be making sure that I'm hammering into my students. But again, if you challenge your students to think about what's the distractor or what would you have done wrong to have got an answer, then students will start to see those types of catches that exam writers will put in there. So question 8, this was from 2023 in our Tech Active paper about our koalas, and you know, there's the different distractors there, and D was our correct answer. So that one sat at about 50% of our population getting that right. If you're not sure where we've got those facts and figures from, it's actually from the additional information that the QCEE provides with their sort of marking scheme kind of stuff, that they do put that in. I'm hoping that in the future they will put information like this out about non-multiple choice questions, but we shall see. And so I think that I'm going to hand over to my partner in crime, Sam, for the next section.
Thank you. Yeah, lots of information can be found in the individual subject report. QCEE comes out with that, and I think about February or March of each year from the previous year. If you haven't had a chance to look through the subject report for any particular subject you teach, it's a treasure trove of information. There are particularly areas in there around for each individual assessment item, they have they identify areas of strength, but also areas to strengthen as well. And those are some really good trends that the QCEE are seeing, and they dot point them to say, you know, these are important, you've done these well, or these are some areas that you should potentially consider working upon. Maybe giving you a hint as to where you should be putting some focus, but I don't know. I don't want to second guess what the QCEE does. So I'm going to focus on the second half of the exam paper, which is the bulk of it, the short response questions. We saw in the first couple of years of the external exam that there were about 10 questions. They seem to have pared that back a little bit to be about 9 questions per paper. Obviously, we don't get to see the paper beforehand, so this is just sort of an overview of what the information we get, and we can presume going forward that they're going to continue with the same number of questions going forward. The overall each overall exam is out of 55 marks, 10 marks from multiple choice. Again, it originally started off as being 50 marks in Tech Active and Tech Free short response. That seems to have now pared it back to about 45 each. So again, not going to presume what the QCEE is going to do going forward, but that 1 mark every 90 seconds that Anna mentioned before, that's now giving students a little bit of extra time, and about an extra 5-7 minutes to go through and do some more deeper checking at the end. Just giving them a little bit of extra space, which in the frenetic nature of those exams, I think they need as much time as they can get to go through and check their papers. What we've got here is an example of an exam question analysis. So these exist at the end of each of the chapters that we have. This particular one here is from chapter 10 on confidence intervals. The idea is that it is a exam style question. Most likely it is going to be from the QCEE past papers. And what we do is we step through what the thinking process should be for students and how the marking scheme, the EAMG, has been applied so that students can understand what are the important steps that they need to show, and also what are the things that may not necessarily be useful in terms of getting a mark, but may be useful for them in terms of understanding and clarifying what they're working on here. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the particular question itself. You can see the solution that's here. One thing that you will notice is that for in the actual question itself, while the question is out of 8 marks, each part is worth 2 marks, and that's clearly indicated on each of the questions within the external exam. You get the total mark for the question, and if it's broken up into parts, how many marks each part is worth. You will also notice in the work solution section there are certain aspects which are in bold. So for instance, in part A, you'll see that p hat is equal to 50 over 200, whereas the phrase from the graphics calculator before the interval statements there, that's not in bold. And that's to replicate what the EAMG does in terms of anything which is bolded is sort of essential. It has to sort of be part of the solution that's there. Whereas anything which is not bolded is beneficial for the students to keep going with their flow of thought, but not necessarily rise it to the level of being worth a mark. Underneath, before we get into the work solution, there's the reading the question and the thinking about the question sections there. These are just some dot points of some areas where students should be going through and thinking about, well, when I read this question, what am I noticing? And you'll also see in the question there that there are some areas highlighted in yellow. So while they can't highlight during the perusal time, once they get into the question, they can go through and highlight, look for those key signposts that they should be looking for to go, this is the particular topic I need to focus on. And can I identify what are some of the key components of that? So in the reading the question part, we've identified that this is the sample and this is the observed size. So I can come up with my p hat value from that. You asked to evaluate the reasonableness in one of the later parts. So think about the structure of what an evaluation looks like. Thinking about the question section, you start to think about, well, we're doing confidence intervals. It is a tech active question, so I'm going to need to remember how to use my calculator. Just some other general thoughts that happen when you're thinking about confidence intervals. For instance, if n increases, then you're getting more confident with it, and therefore your margin of error might fall. Vice versa, a whole bunch of different things that students might find useful to have in their head as they're going through and reading the question, or once they've read the question, have these little areas to think about as they're coming up with their solution. Is my answer reasonable? Does it make sense? Have I actually gone through and answered the question that is being asked? Cool, let's move on to the next slide. We have Joel Speranza. Most people will have heard of Joel Speranza. He's a has great explanations about different topics. He has been hired by Nelson Cengage to go through and produce videos for each of the exam question analyses that we do for each of our chapters. So those videos will be available through they won't be available through the YouTube. They'll be available through Nelson MindTap, and we'll have some information about Nelson MindTap at the end. But his explanations about how to do things, again, those thinking steps, how to go through and read the question, how to find the important aspects of that, all of that in a slightly different way, in his unique way of doing things, might just be useful for students to hear it from another voice, hear it from a different perspective, to have an opportunity to have a go, pause, move on as they're going through at their own pace while they're trying to go through this at home. Some more examples of these questions. This one is from chapter 2 on derivatives of trig functions. One of the things that we were very deliberate about with these exam question analyses is that we were trying to pick questions which covered not just the topics that were there, but also the variety of different ways that we can discriminate between questions. So tech free, tech active, some are SF, most of them are probably aimed at that CF and CU level. We also wanted to try and make sure that there were some questions in there which involved the evaluate reasonableness of the solution or reasonableness of the claim, which we know is going to be on every exam, but also the justify questions as well. And just like in the questions that you see in the exercises, they are very clearly labelled that they are from the QCEE, that they are tech-free, or tech-active, so that you can go through and find these questions on the QCEE website if you want to go back and have a look at them. I don't believe we go through and actually label these questions as CF or CU. That was a very deliberate decision to make. Obviously, when we get to the exam itself, there is no label about whether a question is simple familiar, complex familiar, or complex unfamiliar. But we understand that questions 1 to 10 are your multiple choice. Question 11 forward is where your simple familiar starts. When you work backwards, your sort of last 2 questions are generally going to be your CU question, and the 2 questions before that are likely to be your most likely going to be your CF questions. Now that has varied over the years, but it's sort of started to stabilize out, and that's the pattern that we've started to notice. So question 18 here, we could probably reasonably say that this is going to be a CU level question. However, if students don't know this, they're just going to have to keep going with the question and do as much as they can with the information that is there. This one from 2020, an example of a tech active question. Again, question 12 here. So this is likely to be a simple familiar question. One of the other key indicators that you can pass on to students about what could potentially be an SF question is, more often than not, anything which involves parts is going to be SF. Maybe you have the odd question that is a CF that has some parts in it, but they try and steer clear a lot of the time from having parts in CU questions. Again, going to be very broad about that and say, in the first couple of years, there may have been some odd ones which had CUs with parts in them, but over time, again, it's sort of stabilized, and we sort of started to see that these sorts of questions, parts is definitely your SFs, maybe your CFs, not so much your CUs. Yeah, I think we can move on, Robert. Another example here from the 2020 paper. I think I actually remember marking this question on the external exam process. So having people who have marked the external exam papers bring in a wealth of information. We take that and we have used that as much as we can to give the students as much of a leg up as we can. And for anyone who hasn't signed up to be a QCEE marker, I definitely think it's a great thing to do. Besides the fact that you get paid to do some marking, which is always an extra benefit, there is so much that you learn about what is considered necessary, what is, probably best for students to do, but maybe not necessarily actually worth anything. So you can use those hints and tips and tricks in your teaching and make your students more exam ready before, starting from year 11, get them ready for these things from the very start. And it's one of those things, one less thing that they have to worry about, because they are so exam ready because they've seen it and acted upon it for the last 2 years. All right. You'll also find at the end of each of the chapters, we have a cumulative exam, or 2 cumulative exams. One which is completely tech-free, one which is completely tech-active, and we'll come back and show you a tech-active one in a moment. These exams are sort of mini externals to an extent. They take questions from the current chapter, plus also any chapters beforehand. They're about a third of the size, so they are about 30 minutes each, with a 2-minute perusal time. Again, if you aim for that 30 minutes, 1 mark every 90 seconds, you'll get through that 30-minute period, and you'll hopefully have gotten through all of the questions and had a chance to go through and check everything as well. Part of our process was to make sure that we included as many external exam questions as we could in here. As Anna said at the start, these external exam questions have been spread across the entirety of the book. So they're not just in the exercises, they're not just in the exam analyses, they're in these cumulative exams that appear in each of the chapters that we have there. So there's an example of...
Sam, and just something to notice back on the previous slide, there was a question there that wasn't labelled as a QCEE one. As we sit more and more exams, we will have more and more questions across all of the different content areas. But in that particular example there, you can see with the normal, both question 5 and question 6, that we ended up having to create questions because there wasn't necessarily a treasure trove of questions yet that have been within that area. And so, you know, they're just three examples there of where we've looked at other questions that were similar and we've replicated that wording and the way in which you would enter into a question. And every now and then, you know, based on Sam's experience, say as a marker, or in my experience as having written exams and things like that, we've tried to put in, you know, the normal nice little patches so that students can learn how to engage in that. But sorry, back over to you, Sam.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Thank you, Anna. Yeah, even though we've got 5 years worth of exams, when you think about it, that's what, 18 questions per year times 5, 90 questions across 3 different difficulty levels, across 2 different technology levels. It's actually not really a lot of short response questions when you think about it. So trying to find, you might be able to find a question which deals with this particular topic, but if you want it at a slightly different difficulty, we have to create them ourselves. So I guess that we'll get there eventually, maybe next edition, but we've definitely got the length and breadth of questions that we need from our own personal experience as well. One of the things that we want to highlight with this textbook is that this has been written strictly adhering to the QCEE syllabus by teachers who have taught in the Queensland system, whether it's with this system or in this set of syllabus documents or in the previous set of documents. This is not an adaptation of something that we've picked up from Victoria. We've taken our own questions, our own experiences, our own knowledge, and we have put that into this book. All 3 of us are Queensland teachers or have taught in the Queensland system in the recent past. We have been very explicit about making this linked to the syllabus and no extra stuff on top of that.
And I think the other thing just to, point out there, whilst you may not think there's a lot of difference between the way in which we approach content across different states, there are nuances to the expectation or the boundary points that different states will delve in or expect content to be covered by their teachers. So it could be, for example, that in another state that there is an expectation that students might do something a little bit beyond what we've done, where the question sits within our universe, but it may push them into an area that they don't quite have to enter into. So I think, you know, Sam said, we're all intimately aware of how we do things in Queensland and making sure that this really addresses those needs of students. And the other thing I'll just put in there is a little bit of being a little bit cheeky. We've tried to incorporate into our questions in all of our chapters a sense of you know, Maroon, Queensland, this is our state, this is how we do things. So you will see, for example, questions where we might talk about the RACQ, or we talk about locations that are within our states, teams of sports, things like that. You know, I would sort of say we've also played with things like names and stuff like that to just create a little bit more connection for our students to the book, that they can see and feel that it's within our context. Yeah, so I just think that's something else to look out for. And some of you that are maybe a little bit older than your students might also pick up on some older connections to names and things like that from our experience. Yeah, but I suppose moving on from here, what we've got.
Can I ask, what did you want to mention graphics calculators as well? Because that's uniquely Queensland, isn't it?
It most certainly is. So one of the things that we've done is we have provided, and we'll show you in a minute, how to use the graphics calculator for particular skills that are relevant for our students to know for exams. So we looked long and hard at the calculator list, and we've represented 3 of them within the current text, well, in the textbook. That's your Casio and your TI, sort of at that 83 and the, I've forgotten my number now, 98, no, not 9800. The 2 common Casio. Sorry, Sam, you know the number?
The CG20/CG50 for the
right,
Casios, and then
and
for
the
the TI is the 83, and then the additional instructions are for the Inspire.
The NCI, yeah, the Inspire. We do, yeah, so they're the key calculators that we've used in there. But as we found, a lot of the additional calculators that are approved within this universe, the commands and strokes and things like that are very similar to what we put in there. So this shows you a breakdown of the different chapters across the Year 11 and the Year 12 book, and you can see there, this is the way that we've chunked it together in the way in which the syllabus does it, and you know, and there's a nice bit of gapping and spacing and that across the book. And then the next page shows you at the very
10
front.
10 dot points, 10 chapters, very easy.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
For unit 3 and 4.
And so in the beginning of every chapter, you will see us clearly identifying what are the parts to that chapter that you know, can be of assistance for you in your teaching and planning, seeing how we've grouped the topic together or what we're expecting to cover. You also see there on the left-hand side of the screen that we highlight that every chapter has that exam question analysis. Every chapter will also have a summary, and it will have those 2 cumulative exams. The other thing we've put in those front 2 pages is the syllabus coverage. So the explicit parts of the syllabus that are covered within that particular chapter. And again, that's about us being very accountable to the content that we've put in there. So you will not find dot points that don't exist within the content. These are all things that we can map very explicitly to what we're covering.
Conversely, you'll be able to see that every single dot point is covered in there. So you go, this links to that particular dot point, and you'll be able to go through and tick off every single dot point. So you'll be able to get it, that guaranteed and viable curriculum concept that everything is there, but no more, no less.
No less, that's right. And again, even down to at the beginning of the textbook, we have a syllabus reference grid, so you can see the mapping across the textbook there. So this is in our unit 3 and 4, again, the grade 12 books that we've got there. So as I said, it's been front and center for us going, this is the content that our students need to cover. So therefore, this is where and how we are representing the syllabus within this textbook. And I think that's really vital, particularly now we're all time poor and we need to give time and space to our students wherever possible to actually engage with our content. Here we've got a worked example. One of the things in all of our worked examples, we've highlighted the cognitive verbs, so they will always be highlighted in green. This is only done in worked examples. It's not done in that question analysis, exam question analysis. And the reason why we haven't done it there is in the exam, it's not highlighted that this is a cognitive verb, but it is to help students as they're engaging with content to see these are the types of skills that you're expected to show there. This particular example also showcases how we represent the calculator instructions in the actual textbook itself. So we've got the 84 there and the Casio CG20. As Sam mentioned, the Inspire calculator instructions is available, but that's available through our Mind tab. We also have specific exam technology activities, and this is one that was for the Z scores and exploring the use of the calculator and the maths with that device. And then on to our next bit, I will say about the calculators. I've only ever worked with Casio back all the way when I was at school a million years ago. I was a Casio person,
The schools that I've worked at have only ever been Casio schools. So it was a really interesting experience having to teach myself how to use the TI. So I think that's really helped me in the chapters that I wrote to make sure that the instructions are explicitly clear, because it took me forever to be able to understand how to work those. So I
And
hope
see,
hope that comes through.
I think it does. And I'm sort of not the opposite of Sam. I've worked in schools where we've had both of those particular devices. I will acknowledge that I've never worked in a school with the Inspire, but we certainly as a staff had the Inspire there when we were exploring whether or not that would be the calculator that we were going to use.
Okay, Sam, I'm
Okay.
just conscious of time now. So can you
Sure.
unpack the science of learning in like 50 words or less?
Okay. I think probably the biggest thing I want to point out here is the fact that, we came into writing these chapters with these ideas in forefront in our minds anyway, because these are best practices that are within schools. I know they are definitely best practices and have been used for many years in the schools that I work at. So it was good to find that these were not just things that were supported by the QCEE, that they are explicitly linked in the QCEE documentation. And that screenshot at the bottom corner there is their link to this particular research on the science of learning, and particularly spacing, retrieval, and the interleaving process. So I'll very quickly flip through and give you an example of what each of these is. The idea of spacing is that you space out when you do particular content. So you don't just do a 5-hour block and a 5-hour chunk, and that's your maths for the week. Space it out over time, learning little by little, giving yourself a chance to go back and try things a second time, so that it's creating those neural pathways to solidify your knowledge of what's going on there. It's really the best path for long-term memory, and we understand that the brain needs time to be able to absorb a whole bunch of new knowledge, and doing that all at once, your brain's just gonna be like, no, I can't take it anymore. I know I've definitely experienced that myself. Retrieval effect. One of the big things this is around making sure that you actually put yourself under those exam conditions and going back and having a go at things, not just the big exams, but coming back and doing them in these sort of small, sort of risk-free scenarios, so that you can see, how do you act under pressure when you do these things? How can I actually work better under pressure, or reduce that stress, that anxiety of going in and doing that assessment item? And that means constantly going back and doing practice, but not just of the stuff that you've done most recently, but of the stuff that has been maybe, a week ago, a month ago, 2 months ago, because we understand that this external exam is a 12-month process. It's 12 months worth of content. And to walk into an exam having not looked at something from 12 months ago, you are doing yourself very much a disservice. And the third and final science of learning technique they have here is called interleaving. And it's around mixing things up. I think probably the biggest example that we see of this is the actual external exam itself. It's not in a logical order of content. We have it in terms of simple familiar, then complex familiar, then complex unfamiliar, but the content level itself is actually all over the place. And that means the brain needs to be able to pick up from different drawers in your desk of your brain, for analogy, but anyway, it needs to be able to pick up information from different drawers at different points in time. And if you're practicing that as you're going through, you're helping your brain to be able to do that a lot more efficiently, a lot more quickly. So linking these different, linking similar topics, we're not just going to, when you're doing it on your own, linking those ideas together, linking common ideas together, linking common topics together really is helpful with that. So we walked into the process of writing this book with these ideas in mind anyway. And the idea, really the biggest idea behind that was we wanted to, again, take the stress away from teachers having to implement these great strategies on their own. We understand that not all maths teachers are actually trained maths teachers. We're in a teaching crisis at the moment. And if we can help with this textbook in any way to reduce the workload, reduce the amount of stress that you may have by incorporating these well-researched techniques, that's something that we feel that is something that we can pass on to everyone who uses this book. So those dot points there give you some examples of different areas of our textbook where the different strategies can be incorporated or are incorporated. Obviously, this is not something that we are sort of taking away from teachers. Teachers will still have to use their own ideas for space retrieval and interleaving, but we've just taken some of the stress out of that for you and incorporated that as much as we can.
And I think that leads really nicely, Sam, into the last part of our presentation, which is around just really briefly looking at the other features of the textbook itself. And as Sam mentioned, we've really tried to streamline everything to make it as efficient for you and for students to enter into the textbook. We've tried to declutter as much, reduce the cognitive load for our learners, and this is to ensure that anytime they're engaging with their learning within this realm, that hopefully it would be as productive as possible. We've used lots of diagrams, infographics and summaries, which we'll show you on the next slide. So on the next slide, we've got, this is out of chapter 10 again. You can see there lovely diagrams illustrating concepts. We've pulled the important content into summary boxes, which is those little grey boxes that are there. The explanations will always be clear and concise and very succinct. We've been very intentional about making sure that things are not too wordy, but they represent the heart of the content that's there. As we showed you before, you've got your worked examples with the highlighted cognitive verbs. What you will also see throughout chapters is our exam hacks. Sometimes these will appear within worked examples, but often they will appear within the actual content itself. And that's where we call out something that could be really useful for you or for your students to know. And so, for example, this little exam hack that we've got there is about rounding. And whilst that might not seem like a particularly important thing in the grand scheme of the content, it is actually a really important thing to call out for students when they're actually engaging and creating their answers. So the exam hacks highlight that valuable exam information and do give tips and tricks, to ensure you optimize your mark. At the end of every chapter, we have our summaries, and here is where we pull out those really core parts of the content that's been addressed. We've put them under the headings that you will see then throughout the chapter. And one of the other things we've done is quite a little bit of learning around our Gen Z, and we're now heading into our Generation Alpha and making sure that content is addressing the new and unique learning requirements and needs of those two generations. So here again, you can see the formulas as represented on the formula sheet. They are exactly the same in our textbook. The diagrams, now I showed you a diagram before that had a lot more detail that was seen within the content of the chapter. Here in our summary, we're showing you a similar one, but again, streamlined down even further, because at that particular point, students should understand what that concept actually would look like and feels like. And then last but not least, we've got here another unique feature in our textbooks is that in each of our chapters you will find, or in definitely most of the chapters, you will find investigations. And these are just little add-on activities where that you can use, or you can encourage your students to use to explore the content further. So sometimes these might be where you're actually exploring how a formula has been generated or derived versus where you're actually simulating things. We've also got explicit technology activities, as I think I mentioned earlier, which tap into how you can use your device to explore the wonderful content that's there, but again in a way that's represented or connected very clearly to syllabus expectations. And
particularly around that technology side of things, Anna, sorry, we've tried to make the instructions as descriptive as possible, but also trying to make them as efficient as possible to make sure that students are using their calculator, but they're not overdoing it. They're not switching back and forth between screens as much as some of them do, because they forget how to do something. So we've tried to make the instructions as short and sharp as possible so that students get through the instructions and get the answer as quickly as they can so they can keep going on, because time is important when it comes to that external exam.
That's right. We've given them the highway, not the scenic route, I guess, is another way to sort of think about it. The other thing we've done is we've provided a list of mathematical verbs. This appears at the beginning of the textbook, and it's really those sort of common words that we use within a mathematical kind of context. In that list, again, we've highlighted all of the cognitive verbs as per the QCEE. Another thing, at the beginning of each chapter, we've highlighted the core terminology that students should become really familiar with and be able to work with in a dynamic way, because these are obviously core words. We've tried to cap those words to really the essence of that content, so you will generally not see any more than about, I think 24 is the maximum that I counted in one of the chapters. At the back of the textbook, we also have a glossary and an index. Those blue words that appear there on the right-hand side of the screen, they will actually appear in blue within the content itself. And they are all of those important terms that we've highlighted within the terminology list. The other thing that we've done is the page references that are there are to where the key points where students need to know those terms have appeared within the content. So there are some odd exceptions where there might be multiple page references there, and that's because, again, this is a core part of the content, and or it's connected to an earlier learning and a later learning, and so students, if they're on that journey trying to understand something, that they can see those connections within the actual content itself. And now I think we're on to our mind tap, and I'll hand over to Robert.
Okay, so just briefly, we've alluded to mind tap throughout this presentation, and that's our digital platform, our new digital platform. So it's got all the resources for students and teachers there. It's just important to know that all these extra resources are only available to schools that adopt Nelson Maths. So because you need to set up an account for your class and all the students in it, and so you won't get it if you just buy a single copy of the text. Now we've got Kerry, who's on the line here, and she is our digital success manager. So she's in charge of training teachers, going to schools, training to teachers how to use the platform. So if you do adopt our Nelson Maths 11 to 12 series, then you'll get an ebook, you'll get chapter PDFs of the every chapter, you'll get videos, including the ones by Joel Speranza. You'll get over 100 worksheets, puzzle sheets, skill sheets, and spreadsheets, as well as the instructions for the TI Inspire CX. For teachers, every chapter comes with a topic test. We also have a teaching plan for each book. We also have work solutions to every exercise, including the QCE exam questions. And even though it's on the teacher platform, it can be switched on for students to access by the teacher. And we also have a test generator. Yep, someone was asking in the Q&A when these books will be available. So year 11's available now because schools are teaching from it already. But year 12 will be available from next month, and there are page proofs available now. You can contact one of the Nelson Learning Consultants. So the price is $79.95 for a printed book with MindTap. And if you didn't want a printed book and you just want the ebook and the MindTap, then that's $29.95. So our learning consultants are Amanda and David, and I can see that they're on the line as well. So you might already know one of them because one of them is looking after your school. So you can get in touch with them for information and also to get access to the page proofs.